Okay, welcome to episode number 7 of my Fireside Football Chat series. It's the off season for me, but I like to keep involved. And hey, guess what? The NFL draft is only 8 days away. It's finally here. More NFL news as if we don't have enough. I'm joined here by a gentleman known as Pigskin Paul, and between the two of us, we seem to have about 80 plus years of experience writing and covering and attending various events of the NFL draft. So we're going to get into stories. Senior Bowl, Pigskin Paul has attended over 25 of those. And we're going to talk also about some of the work Paul's done and, of course, this draft and some players and teams. But first of all, welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, Ron. It's great to be with you.
Well, there's a lot of stories to tell, and I think we could fill up a lot of time between the two of us, but let's get right into it because I'm fascinated by all the stuff that you did at the Senior Bowl and so on. But before we get into that, let's walk back as to how you got interested in doing what you've done and kind of the same path, I think, that how I got started in the NFL draft. I mean, what interested you about the draft?
It's really hard when I think back on it after you sent me some initial information to think about, and I'm trying to remember my first memory of NFL football was somewhere in the late 1950s, 58, 59, 60, when I was 10, 11 years old. And I happened one Sunday afternoon to go in and turn on the television set. And of course, we're talking black and white. We're talking antenna up on the roof. And I lived 50 miles north of Boston, up in southern New Hampshire. And I turned on the TV and it landed on the station that was covering a New York Giants football game. And the Giants, we're talking long ago, the Giants were New England's team back in the day. They were the closest to us. And there was no national TV football contract out there. So the teams signed on in the bigger cities around them, like Boston vis-a-vis New York City. The Giants captured that. They captured the Connecticut market, et cetera, et cetera. And I was purely fascinated from scratch, just watching it. I want to say that Sonny Jurgensen was the quarterback. And I think it was when he was with the Eagles before he got traded to the Redskins. And I loved it. I didn't know half of what was going on, but I loved it. And from that point on, I made a point to find out what I could watch. And as you can imagine, back in those days, I could watch one college football game on Saturday. That was about all that was there. There were 3 Boston stations and PBS. That was it. And on Sunday, one of the major Boston channels carried the Giants. And of course, they were the greatest team in football. Just ask Chris Schenkel, who was their play-by-play man on TV back in the day before he went to pro bowling. And the Cleveland Browns, of all teams, were the second. And I think it might have had something to do with the guy that I still consider to be the greatest football player I ever saw. And that was Jim Brown, the running back out of Syracuse for the Cleveland Browns. Unstoppable, just unstoppable. And I remind people, don't forget that when Jim Brown was running for 1,000 yards and leading the league in rushing, they played 12 games.
Yeah.
Then they went to 14. Then they went to 16. And I'm sure we'll be at 18 in the near future.
Of course.
So that it just caught my imagination. I have always been interested in history, and history as influenced and driven by humans. Mm-hmm. And I think I got a tie-in of, okay, where did these guys come from? Where did Jim Brown come from? And so as time went by and all of a sudden you could watch 4 or 5 college games on a weekend, I would watch 4 or 5 games on the weekend. I was in college before they even had Monday Night Football. And believe it or not, the other thing that drew me to it, especially as we evolved in the 70s and the 80s, and computer technology opened up the horizons as far as communication was concerned. You remember going to the sports page, Ron, and all you found was a little paragraph about pro football. And then if something like the draft happened, on the back page in the agate small print would be the list of names who drafted who. And that was it. No,
you had to go to publications. You had to go to the
Yes.
sporting news. You couldn't get it out of the newspaper.
No, not at all. And believe it or not, I just loved the feel, the touch, the vision of trading cards.
Oh, yeah.
And I preferred football trading cards to baseball. And so, my first information in a lot of cases came from the backside of the football card, where they at least showed where the guy went to college, his supposed height and weight, and a few stats from last season. And as everything picked up, and yes, I remember the first couple of draft magazines that I bought were in the late 70s, and I was out of college and getting ready to start a family. And they were on one of the back pages of the Sporting News, where people would place ads. And there were a couple of guys that worked together in the state of Ohio, and they did a guide. And for $5, what have I got to lose? I would get it every year. And then, we evolved to Mel Kiper and Joel Bucksbaum. When Pro Football Weekly grew and they covered in more detail, little did I realize at the time that part of it had a lot to do with gambling, point spreads and statistics. But that's when you could get the weekly transactions. And now that the computer world is out there, as much as I curse it at times, God, it's wonderful to just start hitting the keys and you can get almost anything you want, more than you want or need.
And so for me, it was Joel Bushbaum on the radio. And because probably similar to you, it was roster building. I wanted to know how the teams that I followed built their rosters.
Yes.
And I would have opinions on them. Why did they take a running back instead of doing this, or what, their offensive line and stuff like that. And Joel just laid it out so unbelievably. And that and the AFL for me was the tipping stone, and said, I have opinions. I'm going to start writing about it, which I did starting around 1980.
Okay. Yeah. No, you're right. The AFL was a big influence on me. In fact, within a couple of years, I had changed my allegiance to the Boston Patriots.
Okay.
From the Giants. And that was a very frustrating experience. People think of the Patriots and they think of Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. Hey, before that,
Raymond Berry, right?
Yeah. Before then, it was garbage time. I mean, their first quarterback for the Patriots was a semi-pro, 36 years old Butch Songen.
You don't know that name.
Just before Babe Parilli.
So we live on different coasts. And I too gravitated only to the AFL because we had Lance Allworth out here, and we had all the LA Chargers guys, and I was an LA guy. And then I gravitated to being left-handed, the Kenny Stablers and the Fred Biletnikoffs and the Raiders. And, you're hooked once you have that cast of characters.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. After college, I moved to Wisconsin, and I hated the Packers. Tell me that you have seen this black and white photo that appeared in Life magazine in 1961. The Packers had just defeated my beloved still New York Giants, and it showed Y.A. Tittle after a sack, kneeling on the ground, helmet off, and head bleeding.
I was going to say, no, it's probably 61. I probably didn't see it, but I did see that because I have that ingrained Y.A. Tittle picture. That's a famous picture.
Yes. And so when I moved to Wisconsin after college, I wanted nothing to do with the Packers. They wore me down. And they were bad. I went from one bad team to the next. Patriots. Then I went to the Giants, and they started to slide because they didn't work the draft worth a darn. They just go out. You went to Fran Tarkenton, Y.A. Tittle, you name it. Every veteran quarterback that was just past his prime, the Giants got him. And they didn't win anymore. But the Packers wore me down. And I was rewarded with Brett Favre for 18 years, Aaron Rodgers for 17 years.
Amazing.
And now we'll see what happens with Jordan Love.
That's true. And he got a chance to sit and watch, which was the best thing rookie quarterbacks could do.
Yes.
Let's talk Senior Bowl, because then we're talking, a few years later, obviously, and you've already been heavily involved in the draft by this time, but you made a decision that you wanted to attend the Senior Bowl. Walk me through what motivated you to go to the Senior Bowl.
Well, because in the late 70s and early 80s, shall we say that computer use for the average person was still a rarity. And the media was just catching on to it and starting to expand the coverage. So every year, it started with the blue-gray game.
Oh, yeah.
In Alabama. And that was always held on Christmas Day. And that became a problem in my household because my family was Catholic.
Yeah.
you go to church on Christmas morning. And I think the game started at noontime. Thank God for the invention or allowing the invention of VHS into the world. We'd go to church, and before we left, I would hit the record button and record the blue-gray game. And then, as they expanded coverage on television, all of a sudden, the East-West game's on ABC's Wild World of Sports this weekend. I'll watch the Shrine game. Okay. And then the Senior Bowl was on network TV. And obviously, the Senior Bowl was the gold standard of the All-Star games. And because of that, in my head, bucket list time. I'm 30 years old, I'm married, I got a family started, but it's bucket list time. And one of my bucket list things was, one of these years, I have got to go to Mobile, Alabama, and go watch the Senior Bowl at the end of January. And I festered on that for quite a while and continued to watch the games, and the blue-gray went away. But then the Hula Bowl emerged as a viable option to get draft prospects in live action, at least. And it got to the point where now I'm on computer. Thank you, work. And I'm working at home. And yes, I'm by late 1980s, I'm starting to get folders every year of my top 50 list and mock draft or two, and they're filed away somewhere down in the closet here. And I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it to my surviving children to sort through that stuff. And I don't know, whatever they do with it, good for them. I'm gone or too senile to use it. And so in 1998, my company announced we were based out of Neenah, Wisconsin, the Paper Valley, just south of Green Bay, and football crazy. That was great. I didn't like the Packers still, but football crazy. And when I started with the company, we were headquartered in Neenah, Wisconsin, and we had a plant outside of City of Industry, California. We made paper edge protectors. They made edge protectors and cores and tubes for like toilet paper and lower end stuff, recycled paper. And we expanded to Pennsylvania, Allentown, Pennsylvania. I became the purchasing manager for the entire corporation, not just Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. So I had to make yearly trips, one or two, to all the plants. Well, in 1997, they decided they were going to go into business with a plant in Jacksonville, Florida. Mm. And being a social studies major, I know a little bit of geography, and I know that it's, maybe a 5-hour drive from Jacksonville to Mobile, Alabama. And as the purchasing manager, I have to find paper for this new plant down in the Southeast. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of recycled paper mills down there back in the day. Mobile, Alabama had Mobile Paperboard. Mm-hmm. And they belonged to the Newark group of paper mills who we bought from in Allentown and in California and in Wisconsin. So I arranged through my sales manager to get down to Mobile on one paper buying trip and get an appointment with the mill manager and the sales manager at the Mobile mill. And at the end of the conversation, which went well, we were going to be able to buy paper from them. And they were very nice people, cordial people. And at the end of the meeting, I said, there may be one catch here, Paul. It was Paul Mason was their sales manager. I said, you are about to inherit a legacy. Mm-hmm. The legacy is that I'm going to come here every year to see you. And it's going to be the week of the Senior Bowl. Mm-hmm. And at that time, the Senior Bowl was probably as much a social event as it was a football event. Mm-hmm. And so they had a corporate tent in the parking lot every year. And so 1998 was my first live Senior Bowl as a guest of Mobile Paperboard. Mm-hmm. And I started just going on the Friday and go down and visit the mill, take somebody to lunch, and then they'd invite me to go to the game with them. And as it got further on, I'm now doing my website, Pigskin Paul's Place, and I'm doing a newsletter. Not making any money. I found out the real world was so many people out here doing this that unless you want to make it a career, and I still had to work for a living. So, but I'm doing that, and in about 2004, I'm at the Senior Bowl, and I always used to try to find out where the Packers scouts were hanging out. And every day, it turned out that every morning practice at the beginning of the week, or every day, I should say, they would meet as a large group, all the scouts, up in the stands, and they'd get discussion and assignments for the day from John Dorsey, who was in the scouting staff and became their college scouting director. So I would watch for them and go up, sit maybe 10 yards to either side of them and 5-6 rows behind them and get the ears old, ready, listen, and quietly take notes and listen. And the next year, I was getting ready to do that, and I saw John Dorsey, who was hard to miss. Big guy, 6'2", 6'3", 250, red hair. Hard to miss John Dorsey. Even to this day, it's hard to miss John Dorsey, and just strong-looking guy. And I said, hey, John, how you doing? He stopped and he looked. He said, do I know you? And I said, oh, no. I said, I live in Wisconsin. And it was true by then. I'm a Packer fan and I'm a football fan. I got a newsletter, and this is my favorite week of the year. This is my Christmas. My wife, God bless her, backed me on that. That I could take off even though there were 2 kids at home with her, and she was a teacher. And I said, I'm just down here. And I said, someday I think I'd really like to be big enough and be able to afford it to I'd like to get press credentials down here and actually cover the game and get into the meetings. And he just looked me square in the eye and said, well, do it, man. You only got so long to live. If it really is your passion, do it. And you call me. If you need me to make a phone call down to the Senior Bowl, I know Steve, the director, and all the guys, I'll make a call and tell them that they better get you some credentials. I never followed that up with him, but it gave me the encouragement I needed. And the next year, I had wormed my way in as a regular caller to a sports radio show in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, about 30 miles south of the Fox Valley where I worked. And they did an on-site broadcast from a big sports complex in Appleton. And I worked in Appleton at that time. So I went down and I introduced myself to the station manager who was there. And then he introduced me to Coffee, the guy who had the afternoon local 2.5-hour show 5 days a week. And every time there was a break, he'd wave me into the broadcast studio and we'd talk football and stuff. And I thought to myself, this might be a golden opportunity. So I went back out while he finished the show and I talked to the sports director and I said, I have an idea. I'll give you the website. It's free. Come see my website. How about if I said to you, if you get me media credentials, I'll go to the Senior Bowl this year and I will report back to you guys every day or whenever you want what I saw at practice. Bob came out, we talked about it, and sure enough, within a week, they requested media credentials and gave me my marching orders. Don't wear any official NFL garb. Blah, blah, don't talk about this, that, what. Okay, whatever you say, guys. And I paid my way down, and that was my first Senior Bowl that was my first Senior Bowl with credentials, which was 2005. And I was lost, but there were some very wonderful people working for the Senior Bowl who sent me in the right direction, told me where I couldn't go. And then I tried to start making acquaintances, not too pushy. Neil Stratton he now calls his company Inside the League, and he reports primarily on coaching changes, some personnel stuff. Met him down. He couldn't find the copier room. I found it first, took him down, made a friend right away. A couple other people. So I'm coming back in 2006, and it's post-Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, which had devastated that Gulf Coast area. I was afraid I wasn't even going to get there part of Interstate 10, which runs all the way to California, Southern California, from Jacksonville to somewhere. Couldn't get across the bay in one place because half the bridge had fallen into the bay. I-10, 6 lanes, wow. So I got there, and they had changed things around because the hotel downtown where the players stayed and all the activities took place except the practices had serious damage from storm surge, et cetera, et cetera. So they had moved a lot of they had moved the recreation room for the players across the street, an elevated area of the convention center, and they put in the video games and the pinball machines, and they turned another room into the dining hall. And we had access to that as media. And it was nowhere near as crazy as this. Now they get over 1,000 media credentials issued a year at the Senior Bowl. Back then it was a couple hundred.
But you had some access to players?
Well, not only that, they had a press conference at the end of the second practice, which was like 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon. Coaches from both the squads came in, brought 2 players with them, and they talked, and then you could ask questions. Okay. It was down the hall in the restricted area, but again, media got in. I'm walking down the hallway, and I'm walking, and we have our name tags on, and I'm peeking in. Oh, that's the dining room, and I see the recreation room, and coming out of the room is John Gruden, who was coaching the South team that year, and he's walking out, and he looks at me, and I thought, oh, what the hell? Hi, Coach. How you doing? Impressed the heck out of me. He subtly looked down at my badge and, doing good, Paul. How about you? And I was up on cloud nine at that point. Oh, and so we're walking down. I'm asking him questions and blah, blah, blah. Saw him a couple other times. Let's just say, I felt really bad when the manure hit the fan with the Raiders. And
Sure.
that, because basically I think he's a good guy. And it went on from there. The people I met that I never thought I'd, shake hands with or stand and talk. One day after practice in the afternoon, you could get into the stadium on two sides. I'm walking out to the old parking lot, which is dirt, and out just behind me comes Dick Vermeil. And he gets out there and he's looking around. So I just said, Coach, are you okay? You know where you are? And he said, no, my car's not here. And I said, I think your car's around the other side. And he said, oh, how am I going to get there? This gate's locked. And I just came out. I said, well, if you go down the front here, you're going to walk a couple hundred yards, then turn left and you'll recognize the parking lot. So then we talked some more. And I said to him, may I shake your hand, sir? Because my dad thinks you're a great coach. And it would impress the heck out of him if I told him I stood here and talked with you and shook your hand. Oh, sure, Paul. Come out and see me in my vineyard some year. I said, okay. I never did. But, and Bill Parcells, he played his gruff old self every year. Mike Tice, when he was the head coach of the Vikings, he always had his little gopher with him. And Mike was always late to practice. Be the last guy to show up. Even at the 9 o'clock in the morning, he'd have a big cigar in his mouth. He was a nice enough guy, but just, different. Sitting there one year when Eli Manning was coming into the draft. What year was that? Where did I put my note about Eli? Eli was whatever. Yes, he was. Early 2000?
Roughly 2004.
Okay, there you go. And I'm sitting there. We're at a break between practices, and I look up. I'm way down in the end zone because I like to watch the one-on-ones with the linemen. I played high school football as a lineman. And it's Chris Mortensen coming down the steps. And he's just looking around. So I said, hi, Chris. Oh, do I know you? Kind of similar conversation was he came down. We talked for 10, 15 minutes, just general stuff. And then all of a sudden his phone rings. He says, I got to take this. Arch is on the phone. Archie Manning.
Yeah.
We were discussing, Archie's insistence that Eli wasn't going to be
wasn't going to come to the Chargers.
Yeah, exactly. And so he took the phone call, and I, the one guy that really ticked me off of all those years, Drew Rosenhaus.
Well, he ticked a lot of people off.
If he didn't have some business with you as an agent, he didn't have time.
Yeah.
He did not have time. So, but it was good. It was good.
I have two follow-up questions, and then we'll get into the draft.
Okay.
And the follow-up questions would be, A, did it help you? Did you learn stuff about players? Is there something there that you said, I was here, not just the networking part, but I could come back and I had some confident takes from the draft? And then B, I want you to talk about this last year because you returned to it and how it was this year. Let's
Okay.
close with those two things.
Sure. Well, the first one is a great question, because I would say to you, and this won't surprise anybody, over the course of 28 years, 26 of which I've gone to the game, a lot has changed.
Mm-hmm.
When I first went there with press credentials in 2006, scouts, not everyone, but I could always find a handful of scouts who would talk with me. And I'm not saying they ever gave me who we're going to pick. They didn't know yet either.
They wouldn't know.
But I could ask them, and they would ask me, who you watching while you're here? John, in fact, that was John Dorsey's question. Every time I saw John Dorsey in the Senior Bowl in the stands, after I said hello, I'd say, who you watching, John? And he'd say, I'll tell you if you tell me who you're watching. And so I would say to you, for the first 10 years of the 25 years plus, yes, I absolutely got a feel for some things that were going on and people that were under the radar, that I'd hear 2 or 3 scouts mention the same name. And, I didn't even have it on my list yet. Or you'd get a little, or you just sit there and be quiet and just find a group of guys, and they're going to be talking football because they're all there from teams, and they get together because they all know each other and they've worked and played together. That changed just a little bit before COVID. All of a sudden, and I personally think it's because a little too much got leaked out in casual conversations.
Sure.
And management, I'm pretty sure, put down their foot, in meetings before going to games and such, and said, gentlemen, you're not there to visit. Mm-hmm. You're not there to let them pick your brain up in the stands. You're there to watch what's going on, talk to the other scouts, but I don't want to read something in a paper that they shouldn't know from somebody that was there talking to you, maybe. And boy, it changed. And then, of course, after COVID changed it again, because you had to have health rules put into place.
Sure.
And that's when we lost contact with the players to a great extent as well. At that
time. I would imagine that they were very secret. They had the players shuffling into different aspects and very, very much less contact at that point.
Yes, absolutely. So it has changed tremendously. I'll just say I'm darn glad that I was involved in it for the time period that I was, as opposed to if I were starting today. There used to be of the 5 nights of the week, 4 of those nights, they had some kind of not a banquet, that would be too fancy, but a cocktail hour or 2.
Right.
And media could go. And you'd be I'm standing there talking to Ted Thompson of the Packers. Mm-hmm. I did most of the talking because Ted didn't talk a whole lot.
I think it would be fascinating to meet the GMs. I talk about them and write about them and critique them all the time. Yep. But in person would give me another perspective.
I always look for Ted at practices. And on the practices, the Shrine game was the most open of the games for practices. The media was allowed down on the field for every practice. At the Senior Bowl, you could go down. You used to be able to go down after practice and hobnob and see who's talking to who. And if you could get a player, ask them some questions. But now this time when I went, and I understand it, the security was incredible. Well, 2 weeks before the Senior Bowl had been that terrorist incidents in New Orleans. Where a couple of people were run over and killed, including Jack Besh's brother.
That's true. That's right.
And so I had never seen so many off-duty policemen, on-duty policemen, security people. And obviously part of their job is to keep things separated, because it's the known people that they're after if there's going to be some kind of craziness taking place. So it has changed. I will say to you, I think I got to be there during the golden age of the Senior Bowl.
Little harder to get information there now, but still probably nice to network when you
Oh
can.
yes. Oh yes.
Yeah.
And it's you see old friends, and you can see what you want to see, so to speak, in the practices, as opposed to you stay home and watch it on ESPN. It's great that they're there, but you're lucky if they show you 5 minutes of the one-on-ones.
Yeah, I mean,
I
I would be watching the gauntlet drill. I mean, I would position myself and say, please just don't talk and show me the gauntlet drill. I want to know everything about it because I get a lot of information, for instance, from that drill and from when offensive linemen and tight ends push the sled.
Yes.
So there are certain things I look for, and and so if I were there, that would be 1, 2, 3 for me.
Yeah, and and I have rules in place for myself. I do not write anything about practice with the quarterbacks until Thursday. Practice. They have so much to learn with the playbook that they're given when they show up, and blah 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 blah. And they're doing twice as many interviews as the offensive linemen are doing, of course.
Of course.
So I just say I'm leaving them alone. I'm not going to write something on my website about how inept Jackson Dart is because he had a bad day on Tuesday. I don't think so.
No.
So,
yeah, I get a lot from the TV on some of them, but like linebackers, it's a waste of my time. Yeah. They don't even show anything related to the linebacker. So what, I say, okay, I saved 3 hours.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And let's face it, the Senior Bowl, because of its any construction, all-star games in general, let's face it, the running backs, they're not going to be a big part of the game action. And I'm assuming, Ron, you're probably similar to me in one sense, and that is that I'm old-fashioned, so don't tell me game day doesn't count. Yes, it does. They put pads on and they keep score. And it may either justify or it may raise the question, is this guy great in shorts, but not so good when the pads go on? Or vice versa. You
got to take it with a grain of salt.
Yes.
Which quarterback is in at the 2-minute warning when the game is down by 3? I want to know how they perform.
Yep.
I'm looking at yards per carry running back in the Senior Bowl because I don't want to see him go 6 carries for 12 yards. I don't care if he's never been next to the offensive line. A running back is a running back. They have vision or they don't have vision.
That's right. That's right. So, and they have explosion or they don't have. There's always a hole somewhere, but can they get there and get through it?
So there's still some things. So we're kind of on the wavelength there.
Yeah.
So this week and as we lead to the NFL draft, there's been some stories, and I want to hit a couple of them.
Yes, sir.
Let's start with Derek Carr, because we now know that Derek Carr, why he was retained and why they paid the bonus and why they've done all this stuff is because they couldn't waive him with an injury shoulder designation. I don't know whether or not that impacts their draft because they were going to go with Derek Carr anyway. After you get past Cam Ward, in my opinion, you have a quarterback that's not ready to hit the field. What's your take on the Derek Carr and the New Orleans situation?
It's strange. I think I don't disagree with your analysis of it, but I think we're going to find out even more eventually. I started yesterday to hear some talk that, don't you find it strange that we're 3.5 months past the end of the Saints season, and this just comes up now? He could have had surgery 3 months ago. Maybe he'd have been ready. So they're questioning whether or not he's really got a bad shoulder or he wants out. I'm sure he wants more money, even though he's the highest priced guy on the squad, according to under the cap or over the cap. I think it puts the Saints in a tough spot because they need so much. Okay, let's start with this. They need a new general manager.
And he's been there for
Mickey Williams. Every year. They are so strapped with what they have to do to get under the cap every offseason. And have you ever seen him trade down? You know, he always finds
Thank you,
something.
thank you, thank you. You're reading my reports, huh?
Oh, well,
Yeah,
I think everybody's on to that one.
yeah.
And, you know, they do. Mrs. Benson and whoever, they need to take a good hard look. And I'm not trying to get a guy fired. I'm not going to anyway. But
Yeah.
he doesn't think in the big picture, I don't think. That roster is so old that, you know, they've got guys playing over their head, thank God, like a Demario Davis.
Yeah.
That guy's playing like he's still 30 years old. And what is he now, 36, I think, or 37?
Yeah, there's no succession planning. They,
No,
5.3 draftees per year does not get it done.
no. And you think about it, in my opinion, what a waste. Because they've obviously got a good scouting staff, because they also end up being able to keep 4 or 5 undrafted free agents every year on that roster, and some of them are pretty darn good, and they end up with good careers. So you can't tell me that the scouts aren't doing their job. Whoever's interpreting what they hand in and their own personal opinions. Um, I I hate that this has come up, to be honest with you, because I personally think that Spencer Rattler, long term, might be at least an average NFL quarterback. But he sure as heck isn't ready to go in now. You know, they'd be better off to put Taysom Hill back at quarterback. And, you know, because I don't, you know, they've gone from the top of the NFC South to the bottom, in my opinion. I think Carolina's going to move past them this year.
You know, that division, you pick up some wins here and there because it's not a great division, but it's also a tricky spot because the Atlantas, if they're underachieving, if New Orleans is underachieving, if they have injuries, they don't have the roster depth, they're going to finish 7-10, which isn't good enough to get a top tier quarterback.
Elite, right.
And it is, and it isn't playoff bound. You're in limbo land.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
So that's a tough one. Do you think, I mean, this would be an in-division trade, which only Minnesota tends to do.
Yes.
But do you think Kirk Cousins would be an option for them as a bridge?
I think two things on that. I think, first of all, I'm not sure they've got enough flexibility left on that roster from a salary cap standpoint to take Kirk. You know, he's almost 40 million, I should say, this year against the cap. They'd have to find room for that somehow, some way.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I don't see how, unless the NFL allowed them to make some kind of crazy, you know, consideration for this and that, but I don't think the NFL will. I don't think they're going to budge. They have very few rules on the cap, and a few of them are golden. I think that's a golden rule. If you give guaranteed money to a player, it's going to always count against you till it's paid off.
Let's hopscotch around some of the teams, and I appreciate that we do have a question here, so I'm going to show this question. Carr's former team, the Raiders. So everybody's got him going astringenti, and I'm going to have something coming out on Monday. I'm not so sure it's a done deal. What are your thoughts?
I don't think it is. I don't think it should be when you look at that organization. I think that organization is very difficult to try to translate because Davis is such a strange person. You know, and he's really only the managing partner. I'm wondering how much I'm not dodging your question. I'm wondering how much Tom Brady will be involved, right, or is involved right now as we speak with the draft coming. But I think Genti might be their best option, quite frankly. I'm still not sold on Shador. I'm not. I admire his guts. That kid has been pounded for the last 2 years at Colorado, and he still hangs in that pocket most of the time and makes that throw. But his arm isn't strong by any means, and he's not a statue, but he's not as mobile as a Jaden Daniels or even as a Jackson Dart. He's not as mobile.
I think his game will have to be reprogrammed.
Oh yes,
a lot of the college game morphs the NFL now, and they come in a little bit more ready.
Yes.
But his system, I think he'd have to be reprogrammed.
I think you're right. It's, let's face it, it's difficult. I applaud, and as you know, you draft follower, football follower, anybody that follows it, you go in cycles. Very seldom do you have 2-3 years in a row where quarterback has 5 or 6 guys.
Oh yeah,
they're going to go like last year. That doesn't happen. Like last year, tight end was a disaster area, and Bowers doesn't count. He's a receiver, not a tight end. And I mean, God bless him, he's really good.
Yeah.
But this year, tight end, I think personally, just on talent, Tyler Warren and Loveland both should be top 10 picks. I don't think they will. I'm not sure either one will. And there's probably, I think I've got 5 tight ends or 6 in my top 100 right now.
I've got 8.
There you go. And I don't think we're crazy by a long shot. And last year, what? I think I had 3 in my top 100.
Yeah. Fantastic year for tight ends.
Yeah, it is. And, same thing, safety, kind of weak. I like the guys at the top, but you get past the first couple rounds and, roll the dice. I'm sure some guys are going to come through. That always happens. The sleepers arise. And like that little guy on the Raiders, who was the one from Notre Dame, who was an undrafted free agent last year. And by the end of the year, he was starting for them. And it wasn't just because. It was because he earned it. So we're back to, what, Ron, I'd be curious about your opinion on this. It seems to me that 10, 15 years ago, the Ron Wolf kind of methodology was out there that, you try to draft a quarterback every year, even if it's late, you try to draft a quarterback for future capital gains, and you need to draft the best available athlete. I watched the draft the last 3-4 years. No. It's what do we need? We got to get, we need a quarterback. And I thought, do you know Eric Galco at all?
Sure.
Personnel. Okay. Eric used to be in our group, and then he went with the Shrine people, and has done a really good job bringing their talent level up, in my opinion. Eric did something when he concentrated on his website. He did something, first guy I saw that did this. When he did his prospect rankings, he had a list of everybody and a separate list of quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Near the end, he took the quarterbacks out of the regular top 100 and he ranked them in a separate column.
Mm.
And I think he had it right.
Yeah.
The draft revolves around what's the quarterback class like, who needs a quarterback, and there's always a half a dozen or more teams that could stand an upgrade, or a quarterback in waiting on the bench for 1 or 2 years. And they're going to get, I think it's entirely possible. I don't see it. I can't see where they would go. I think we could have 4 in the first round this year. I'm thinking
that'd be, I don't know because we had a year where Manuel was drafted by Buffalo, 16, and then you had to wait. And then Kenny Pickett was drafted by Pittsburgh not that long ago at around 20,
Yes.
and then you had to wait.
Yep.
This draft is almost similar to those for me. I want to answer your Tom Brady question a little bit.
Okay.
Because I think Tom Brady will have his fingers on offensive people, and we'll know more about quarterbacks because Tom Brady will have input there. I think after they draft a quarterback and maybe another skilled player, Tom Brady, my personal opinion, goes in a little back room and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then they move on with the Tampa Bay kind of organization. They brought in the man who understands a little bit. If there's anybody in that division, Atlanta, Carolina, New Orleans, Tampa Bay, at least Tampa Bay kept their picks and did some succession planning. And you mentioned the Green Bay model of Ron Wolf. And I'll say a couple of things about that as well. Ron Wolf had it right because he doubled. In fact, to this day, Green Bay is famous for doubling and tripling at positions of need. Whereas other people hit it once, and if they miss, it's a colossal fail because they missed on a player. But Green Bay, if they like a position, if they like wide receiver, they draft 3 of them. Back-to-back years, they drafted 6 wide receivers. Nobody hits on everybody in the draft, but if you really need that position, and if you get 2 or 3 out of those 6 to hit, you filled a need. Yep. So that's one philosophy. And then if you have a GM with a pulse, and so Jacksonville fans don't listen right now, Atlanta fans don't listen right now and stuff like that, then they're not necessarily, they're still going best player available. If you're Baltimore, you're still going value because they understand the value game. If you're Philadelphia, you're still going value.
Yeah. Value. And I think the other thing that people forget, I remember having a conversation in the Mobile airport, and I don't even remember the scout's name. He's since retired long ago, but we were just sitting there talking, and we got to talking about square pegs and round holes. Mm-hmm. Not a good philosophy. And concurrent with that, or successive with that, we talked about people, including team owners in a lot of cases, don't seem to understand how disruptive it is when you fire your GM and your coaching staff and everything is new again.
Sure.
And chances are, if you had a team that was really built around the principle of we need a fit, they need, like you mentioned, the Ravens. The Ravens draft guys that will fit in their systems. Mm-hmm. That's and the reason that works is Ozzie Newsome, Ernie Accorsi, and John Harbaugh, the forgotten Harbaugh, John Harbaugh. Those guys have all been there forever.
Yeah.
And
continuity.
So they want a Ravens guy when it comes to draft. And I think there's so much this. That's why I felt bad for John Mara when they had him. I thought that show was great, by the way. I don't know how you felt. Did you watch the one last spring with the Giants going through the draft process? If you ever get a chance to go to YouTube and watch it, I thought it was great. It was better than the fall program or the, Hard Knocks in the camp. And
I'll take a look.
John Mara coming in, and they're talking about not signing Saquon. And John Mara comes in and says, I just have nightmares about, he's our favorite player. We sell more of his jerseys. I was surprised that Shane and Dable weren't both gone. Shane seems like a nice guy when you watch that series, but he, colossal mistake. Daniel Jones has one good, healthy year, and you give him the big contract, and you franchise tag Barkley. That's backwards.
Well, what was backwards is drafting him at number 6.
Well, yes, that's true too. But now that you're stuck with him, it's even worse that you double down.
Yeah.
And he has one good year, and you give him 40 mil, and Barkley walks because you won't go over 10 mil for him. Duh. Do the math.
Let's transition to a team in transition, in my opinion, that has some good GM qualities and some not so good GM qualities, but they're in this very tough division, and that's the Chicago Bears. They're in an interesting spot at 10 because you mentioned 2 tight ends that I like and that a lot of draft people like in Warren and Loveland. And the Bears may have a chance to draft Warren at 10. Do they do that? Do they draft a left tackle? Do they go after a wide receiver? I don't know Keenan Allen's status right now. He's still listed on the team. What do you think about what's going on in the Bear camp? Because they have to be, I mean, that's a hard division. It's not like playing in another division.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a hard time with them drafting too high at offensive tackle. Although on one hand, we might say, well, they're going to have 3 new starters on the inside, all 3.
Yeah.
Let's go whole hog this year and bite the bullet, and we'll draft somebody we hope can win the left tackle spot. I don't know about 4 new guys on a 5-man offensive line in the NFL being a real
should never work, although Kansas City did make it work.
They did. Short term, they did. Yeah. Yep, exactly. But I think they ought to concentrate on what they've done already. Unless we get to day 3 and they've got some sleeper that one of their scouts is dying for. Then go get a tackle. I think they need some help on defense. Defense.
So where would you go? Would you go edge?
I might go edge. I'll tell you the guy that fascinates me is the second defensive tackle from Michigan, Grant.
Okay.
At 6'4", 330 pounds, and he still ran a 4.9 5-yard, 40-yard. 4.9 at a 50-yard. I think he could dominate and just totally plug up the middle of that line. And then you work the guys around him who are already there. And I think their defensive front looks pretty good.
And, philosophically, if you want your teams to be better against the pass, you have a pass rush. I think Atlanta has good cornerbacks and a good defensive secondary, but because they so devalue edge rusher, it ruins everything because they have to cover that extra second or 2.
Yes, exactly. And I think the other one that drives me insane on draft day when I'm yelling at the screen for certain teams that I care about is, even the scouting show. Okay. Gentlemen, somebody has to play offensive tackle in the NFL. Mm-hmm. You cannot look at every other guy that plays tackle in college and does it well and decide that maybe they'd be better at guard. Mm-hmm. Who the heck is going to play tackle if you keep moving all these guys? I like the people that are standing up now and, they're saying, well, the Patriots, they got, before May gets killed, they got to protect him. Oh, somebody's arms are 1/2 inch too short.
I know.
Say what?
It's a dilemma for them. They're at number 4 and they need a left tackle.
Yeah. I think a trade out is the answer. Hopefully somebody like the Saints, if you don't ask them for too much, if they decide Shador's the guy and they want to go get him, okay, trade you a number 4 pick for a number 9 and give me a 3rd rounder.
I don't want that. You know why I don't want that?
Why is
because they have 4 of the top 77 picks in this draft. They have 9 picks in this draft. They have a whole bunch of roster additions that have upgraded them. If I can't get at least a second and hopefully a first in next year's draft, because I know it's New England is not all of a sudden going to win the Super Bowl in 2025.
Either way. Yeah.
So it's a 2 or 3 year process.
Yes.
I want that extra very high pick next year. Otherwise, I'm sticking with what I got. And I understand I'm stuck at 4 because it's not like having the top 3 people.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you hope
that would be my argument.
Yeah, no, and I can't argue with it, Ron. I think my response to it would be, it might be, even if it's just a third rounder, you're only going down 5. You probably get that LSU left tackle. Okay.
Yeah.
Him being able, I mean, the Patriots had the worst offensive line in the NFL, in my opinion, last year. It was a crap show every weekend. And they've got to do something. And I believe a guy like Mike Vrabel, as long as it's reasonable, will take an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman. Yeah. He appreciates the guys in the pits better than some of these guys do.
Yeah. Improving the pass rush would be that other area that they could work on long term. Long term with the draft.
Yes, exactly. And if somebody's, the part that has struck me it seems like in the last few years, it's really ballooned. There are so many guys I look at and, God, I'd like to take him, but look at his medical. Look at his medical. And then my little voice in the back of my, yeah, but Paul, nowadays doctors can work miracles.
That's true. There is part of that. My philosophy on medicals is, if you're a rebuilding team, if you're a team with few draft picks, if you don't know how to use your draft picks, like a Tennessee and this and that, you don't take questionable. You have to take sure things. Yes. If you got 12 picks like San Francisco in the old days with Pete Carroll and John Schneider in Seattle, you got 11 picks. You take a medical because you got 8 or 9 other picks and a better foundation.
Good point. Good point.
I mean, I don't want my bottom feeder teams to be worrying about if the guy's going to play or not.
Yes, I agree there. And of course, it makes sense. We don't know that much about it because the one thing that the combine is still incredibly important about is medical, physicals. We don't hear a thing because legally we can't.
Yeah.
HIPAA laws say you can't put on the stat sheet right below his 40 time that he's got this in his knee and he's got this in his shoulder, and you
got to go through the information leaks, and then you have to worry about lying season. Who's telling you the truth and who's not? Who's spreading information for their own good?
Yep, and we are still in lying, misinformation.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw a couple players at you here.
Okay.
Because they fascinate me.
Okay.
Jordan Watkins. I just like how he produces on the field, and nobody is talking about him. He reminds me a little bit of, I'm blanking out on the guy, but the New York Jets, Alan Lazard, who I went to bat for, and he was basically undrafted. Jacksonville let him go. Aaron Rodgers sits on the bench next to him and says, let's put this guy in. I like him. And he becomes Aaron Rodgers' best friend.
Yep.
That's, to me, Jordan Watkins. Any opinion on him or any other sleeper you like at wide receiver?
I think he absolutely gets drafted. And I think the combine clinched that. I mean, the film on him is good.
Yeah.
The thing against him is it's a Lane Kiffin college offensive system.
Uh-huh.
So the guy isn't going to see that kind of coverage when he gets to the NFL.
Yeah.
I think if I needed a receiver, if I needed to fill up my receiver room, I would look at somebody like Watkins by about the 5th round, even.
Yeah.
5th or 6th. I think there are lots of good wide receivers out there this year. There just aren't any great ones that I can identify. There's no Malik Neighbors.
No.
There's no Brian Thomas. Although at this time last year, it was questionable whether Brian Thomas was a first rounder or was he just cleaning up the residue because Neighbors was so darn good at LSU. And I guess we got the answer. They're both great.
LSU tends to bring them out in pairs.
Did you see the sad news this week that Kyron Lacey?
Yeah.
I had him off my list because I knew something was ugly, but I didn't think it was so bad he'd do that. That's terrible.
Yeah, I scouted him. Obviously, there were red flags. I loved him before he transferred, and his production kind of, if we're talking just to forget the off the field stuff.
Yes.
My evaluation of him was that I was dissatisfied with his progression in 2024 as a football player at wide receiver. And that bothered me a little bit. I think, I don't have it in front of me, but I think he ran a little slower. I know he wasn't invited to the combine, but there were reports in terms of that. So I didn't have him as one of my draftable players, but I was very intrigued before the 2024 season started. He was certainly going to be on my list.
Absolutely. Yeah, me too. They're not the same guy, but the reason I was still watching what was going on with him was because of the success so far, knock on wood, of Mark Butte with the Patriots.
Okay. Yeah, I love that fit. I really like, he's always good for 3 receptions. 3.
Yeah. And on that team, that's not bad.
Yeah. That's true.
Because May doesn't have time to look, progressions. What are those? You look at your first guy, and if he doesn't have it, run or bail out, one or the other.
So I'm going to ask you about one more player. Okay. And this is going to bring you and I back to the past, because Joel Bushbaum used to have this saying, looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane.
Yes.
And
it's true.
And I'm telling you, I love that. I have another pet peeve with a statement, but we won't get into that one. Shamar Stewart of Texas A&M.
Yeah.
He's a freak. He's just an athletic freak. And then in 3 football years, he has 4.5 sacks.
Yep.
Total. What do you do with a guy like that?
I think if you're even going to consider him, and I'll bet you, if we could get inside, I'll go conservative. There's at least 10 NFL teams that don't even have him on their board.
Yeah.
Okay? Because they don't see, we don't have time to take somebody from scratch and make him an all-star despite his numbers.
And then he leaves after free agency.
And that's exactly. That's my concern with a lot of players on a lot of teams. He had a great contract season. Sometimes they have a great second contract season too. Yeah. I don't know what you do with a guy like that. I guess you can try to dig inside. I think there are some mitigating factors potentially here. Let's face it. Jimbo Fisher was a disaster at the A&M program. Just a disaster as a head coach. Got all the 4 stars, but they never developed one of them that I can think of. So, was it a coaching thing? Was it a system thing? But still, you hit it exactly. How long can you wait on these guys? And even though they're not making a ton on the first contract, it is slotted though. And if he goes in the first round, I would not take him. I guess he'd be off my team's board.
I defer sometimes. I feel like I could draft better. I know I could draft better than 20 GMs out there, but if Howie Roseman trades up and picks him at 27, I'm elevating his draft grade because I trust Howie Roseman.
Yes, there you
in
go.
terms
Good
of what he
point.
does.
Yeah. And I don't trust, pick
Jerry Jones.
Yeah. And I feel bad. I think one of the nicest men in football is Arthur Blank. I see the charities that he contributes to and runs. I see just a little thing like making it affordable for somebody that goes to a game to buy a hot dog and a soda for their kid and not cost $20. I think his heart's in the right place. He's going to have to make a change again soon. Those guys aren't getting the job done.
No.
In particular, Fontenot, the general manager. He's the guy that brings in the talent. And they're not getting it.
I agree.
It's sad. I feel bad for him because he's no spring chicken.
That's true.
Bad luck befalls Jerry Jones and his Cowboys. It's a good day for Pigskin Paul.
As we close up, what are you most looking forward to? And on Thursday, for example, what's going to excite you? Is it uncertainty? Is it a particular team? Is it a player? What are you looking forward to now? I mean, we're 8 days away.
I think, and this when I say it, I don't think it'll surprise you. I think initially, I'm going to want to watch as soon as they go on the air, because having lived and worked within an hour of Green Bay for 40 years, that's how long I lived in Wisconsin. I want to see how things turn out for them in the big scheme of things as a host for the draft. My comment is, it's about time. They should have had this long ago, because despite the snake oil salesman in Dallas, America's team is the Green Bay Packers, and should be. It's small. It's small city America, and they die with the Packers, live and die with the Packers. And you don't hear too many ugly stories coming out of Green Bay. Once in a while, but so literally that. And then the other thing I think I'm going to be watching is, I don't think I've ever followed a draft where round one, every pick belongs to the original team that got those. And right now, that's still the case. And, this draft class may be questionable enough that it stays that way, in my opinion. I don't see like the quarterback feeding frenzy we saw last year. And son of a gun, if the guy that probably had the least love ended up maybe as the second best guy last year, Bo Nix with the Broncos. Perfect marriage, in my opinion. Sean Payton and his style offense, and Bo Nix. Hand in glove.
And the reality is that everybody from this year's draft, if you take out Cam Ward out of the equation, the next best quarterback, whether it be Sanders, Dart, or whatever, would probably have been 7th last year. So Cleveland or the Giants, they could sneak back into the end of the first round and get a quarterback.
Because whoever you get should be sitting on the bench, no matter how bad your team is.
But I think it's fascinating that maybe teams are understanding that you have to hit at least a double, if not a triple or a home run in the first round. And those picks are valuable, and you should keep it. I know the Rams only have a first round pick every 8 or 9 years, but they did pretty good with those first round picks when they
did, but they also learned, didn't they? Realistically, they learned not F the draft.
But they did it the right way. 24 picks in back-to-back drafts. They rebuilt the roster the correct way, and teams should learn from that.
Exactly. You can do it that way, but you got to have smart people.
Yeah.
Stroud and McVay are pretty smart guys.
And you can coach as well.
and there's a lot of teams in the league that are still questionable, but it's going to be, it's always fun.
Oh,
it's always fun. And I think there is a lot of talent in this draft. I think once we get to about pick 25 or so, or even 20, the next 50, 60 guys could go anywhere from that point on. Guys that I have ranked 60, I would not be shocked if some of them went at 35.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. They're interchangeable.
Yeah, just make sure you pick your kind of system guy. To me, that's going to be a key here. Don't go out in left field. Don't trade your life away. Find guys that will fit your system and just stick to that pick. Don't go crazy. Because Arch Manning may not be coming out next year.
I don't think he will.
No, I don't think he will either, and I don't think he should. He's the best athlete in the Manning family.
Yeah.
But he's probably at this stage nowhere close to being the best quarterback.
I don't know. You and I go way back. I think Archie was a great athlete.
Oh, yes. Yes, he was. He was, absolutely. And that poor
My favorite player in college, actually.
That poor guy got killed in the NFL.
Well, the draft rules were different then. When Danny Abramowitz is your best player on the new franchise.
Yep.
You're looking at a Hall of Fame quarterback if it was a regular draft. But
yeah, you're right.
Anyway, that's a different story. I want to talk about the two websites that you contribute to, because I like them even for a long time. Colin Lindsay, you guys do a great job at GBN, Great Blue North, I think it stands for.
Yes, Great Blue North.
You get so much laid out information about every team's draft pick is laid out in a beautiful chart. You get all the stories, the things that you write there. You get the trades. You know exactly why and who and everybody who was traded. So everybody who's listening, watching this show, check out that website. And of course, you're writing columns for them.
Yes, I've gone back to that. I don't really get paid by anybody. I want my thoughts out there, and I welcome feedback, pro and con. But yeah, I had my new niche at Draft Countdown.
And let's do Draft Countdown too. There's the Draft Countdown website as well.
Yes.
And Scott Wright, who I conversed with a couple of times, wrote some unbelievably detailed analysis of the first 2 to 3 rounds of the draft. He was a gem. Yes. And he left it to you guys, and you're still writing and contributing to that site as well. Believe me, these are 2 websites that you want to check out if you're into the draft.
And what people should know is important. Both of them are just free. We ask that you click a few of the ads, but neither one is a subscription situation. Yeah. And I like that, because I go to a lot of free sites myself, and I curse every time I go to ESPN because they give me a headline on Twitter/X, and you go and you read one paragraph and then it says, and ESPN Plus, ESPN Insider required to go. You don't get that at our websites. And I like the spot that they've given me on Draft Countdown. We've got multiple writers to cover it all, but I'm kind of like, older folks will get this if you have some older listeners. I feel like I'm kind of like an Eric Severide on 60 Minutes. I can pick whatever I want to write about any given week. Some weeks because there's nothing going on. Other weeks I could write forever.
Oh yeah, I'm writing constantly, and it really helps me. It just helps me find clarity: what the team did right, what the team did wrong, what I expect during the season, and stuff like that. Listen, Paul, I know you and I could go on for hours. This is our first time together. And I think we see a lot of the same kinds of things, I think that comes from years of experience in terms of drafting and understanding the value of the NFL draft. And I think if more teams kind of understood how to use the draft correctly, we would have different teams pop up in the bottom 5 and top 5 on draft day instead of the same teams over and over again. Yes. But I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for contributing and your draft thoughts and your draft stories. Next week, we get every team covered. I have a couple of guests coming on, and we're going to go pick by pick. We're going to have as much intel as we have. It may not be what the GMs actually do, but we're going to give intel as to what we think they should do. And then you'll see a lot of my writing, and I'm sure you'll see a lot of Paul's writing down the road as well. So thanks, everybody, for listening and watching this episode. And I'll see you next Wednesday, one day before the draft, a kind of mock draft as we go through round 1 of the NFL.